I never imagined I'd be stuck in such a mess. It all started with a simple text from my boss, Dan. A 10 p.m. message that read, "Hey, we need you to look at something critical ASAP. It can't wait until morning, critical." That word hit me like a ton of bricks. I was already in the middle of an evening out with my dad. We were at some dive bar just outside of town, and for a moment everything felt normal, until I read the message. I had been itching for a break. A quiet night with my dad, talking about old times, having a beer, and letting the grind of the day slip away. But no. Duty. Duty was calling. I looked at my phone, then at my dad, who was nursing his own drink. The glow from my screen reflected off his glasses, but he didn't seem to notice. I texted Dan back quickly, "I'll be right there." My dad looked at me over his glass. He didn't say a word, but I could feel his eyes boring into me. Like he knew. Like he'd been waiting for this moment all night. "You're gonna go, huh?" he asked, his voice low but firm. "Yeah, something's come up. Dan needs me for something critical." He shook his head slowly, taking another sip from his glass. "You know, you could have just said no. You've worked hard enough. This is supposed to be your time. You've been going nonstop, son." I could feel the weight of his words, but the reality was undeniable. I couldn't just ignore my boss, not when something urgent came up. He sighed, putting his glass down with a soft thud. "I've been there, too. Running around, thinking you're doing the right thing. But what's the cost, huh? Work doesn't stop. It'll always be there. You don't get that time back. Not a single second." It hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to ignore him, get up, and leave. But my dad, always the stubborn man, wasn't done. He leaned forward, looking me straight in the eyes. "Duty before leisure," he said, his voice soft but unyielding. "That's the rule. But sometimes, it's the leisure you need to keep your head straight. Remember that." I didn't have a response. My phone buzzed again, Dan, impatient. I stood up, fumbling for my wallet, trying to shove my thoughts aside. I needed to go. But I could feel the weight of his words pulling me back. Maybe my dad was right. Maybe this wasn't just a matter of getting the job done, but of protecting myself from burning out. I drove to the office. It wasn't far, but my mind kept drifting. The whole ride felt like a blur, and when I arrived, Dan didn't even acknowledge my hesitation. He was all business. He handed me a stack of papers, and just like that, I was lost in the task again. It wasn't until hours later, as I sat in my car, staring at the parking lot lights, that I realized I hadn't given myself a chance to breathe. The work had piled up, and I'd thought I was doing the right thing, answering to the call of duty. But something inside me told me it wasn't the right answer. The drive back home felt different. The weight of the night, my dad's words, the unfinished tasks, the never-ending demands of work sank deeper into my bones. The lights on the highway seemed dull, and the quiet was almost too loud. I was exhausted, but my mind was still buzzing with everything I hadn't let myself process. When I finally pulled into the driveway, I thought about what my dad said again. Duty before leisure. Sure, but at what cost? Was this really the way to live? Maybe I needed to reassess. Maybe, just maybe, I had it all wrong. I walked into the house, exhausted but strangely awake. My dad was asleep in his chair, the TV still flickering. I didn't wake him. I just sat down, thinking about what he'd said. About the balance between duty and leisure. Somewhere in between, I realized, was where I needed to be. But tonight, at least, I would sleep. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, I would find that balance. The next morning came too soon. I woke up with the kind of grogginess that only comes after a night spent working late into the hours when most people are already deep in their dreams. My phone buzzed again, Dan, of course. asterisk need you to pick up where we left off. ASAP, asterisk that word again. ASAP, I groaned and rubbed my face, letting the weight of everything settle in. My dad was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a coffee mug in hand. He didn't look at me immediately, but I could feel his gaze lingering as I walked past him to grab my own cup. He didn't need to say anything, his silence spoke volumes. I took a long sip of coffee, trying to shake off the remnants of last night. The work, the tension, the thoughts of my dad's advice that I had so easily brushed aside. The quiet in the room felt heavier than usual. "You're going back in today?" my dad asked, his voice almost casual, but I knew better. His eyes were sharp, watching me like a hawk. "Yeah," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "Dan's really pushing for it. It's critical, you know?" He nodded, but his eyes didn't leave me. It was the kind of look that made me feel like he saw right through my excuses. The kind of look that made me realize just how much I was avoiding facing the truth. "You're gonna keep pushing yourself, huh?" he said softly, a note of disappointment in his voice. "I get it. But sooner or later, you'll burn out. Work's always gonna be there, son. But you? You only get one shot at this." I sat down at the table, suddenly feeling small, like I was missing something important. His words from last night echoed in my head. Duty before leisure. It sounded noble in theory, but when was the last time I actually felt like I was living, not just working? When had I taken a real break? A real breath? A chance to just be me? "I can't just leave things hanging," I said, more to myself than to him. "I've got responsibilities." "And you're doing your best, I know," my dad replied, his voice softer now. "But there's a point where you have to ask yourself, what's it all for? You're working yourself into the ground. What are you missing out on? What's slipping away while you chase after deadlines?" I stared into my coffee, suddenly feeling like I was standing on the edge of something, like a choice was about to be made whether I liked it or not. I knew my dad was right. But what was the alternative? Just walk away from everything? It wasn't as simple as that. "I don't know, Dad," I muttered. "It's just tough, you know?" "Yeah," he said, standing up and giving me a pat on the shoulder. "I know. But you've got to take care of yourself, too. You've got to find that line. And when you do, don't cross it just because someone else is asking you to." I didn't have an answer for him. Instead, I just stood up, grabbed my bag, and left. The drive to work felt different this time, slower, more contemplative. I wasn't just driving to work, I was driving to a decision. The thought of another day like yesterday, filled with tension and half-finished tasks, made me feel sick to my stomach. I couldn't keep doing this. When I walked into the office, Dan was already on the phone, barking orders to someone on the other end. He didn't even acknowledge me at first. But then, just as I started to sit down, he looked up with a sharp, almost impatient glance. "You get that last file I sent you?" he asked, not waiting for a response. I didn't answer immediately. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Then I set my things down, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "Dan, I need a break. A real one. I've been running on empty for too long." He raised an eyebrow. "What? I'm not your guy for this right now. You want it done right? You'll need to find someone else for the time being." I could hear the uncertainty in my own voice, but I pushed through it. "I need to take care of myself. I'm not going to burn myself out for a deadline." He stared at me for a long moment, as if processing the words. For a second, I thought he might get mad or fire me on the spot. But then, he just let out a long breath, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right," he said, surprisingly calm. "You're right. Go take a few days. We'll figure it out. Just make sure you come back focused." I stood there, still half in shock that it had been so easy. But maybe that's the thing. Sometimes, you just have to stand up for yourself. And sometimes, people will understand. I left the office that day, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The road stretched ahead of me, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was chasing anything. Maybe I didn't have all the answers. But I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to let work define me anymore. As I pulled into my driveway, I looked up and saw my dad sitting outside, his chair tilted back just slightly, a relaxed smile on his face. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I was finally doing what was right. Not for anyone else, but for me. Maybe the balance wasn't about choosing duty or leisure, it was about learning when to step back and take a breath before diving into the next thing. It was something I still had to learn, but I was getting there. Slowly. The next few days felt like a long exhale I hadn't realized I'd been holding. At first, I wasn't sure what to do with myself. I was used to always having a deadline looming, to constantly checking emails and managing expectations. But now, with the weight lifted, there was a strange sense of freedom. I spent the first few hours of my time off sitting on my couch, doing absolutely nothing, just staring at the ceiling. It was foreign, but oddly peaceful. But eventually, the silence became uncomfortable. My phone sat on the coffee table, practically taunting me with its stillness. The buzzing wasn't there, the constant need for answers wasn't there. And yet, I couldn't shake the thought that I was somehow falling behind. That maybe taking a break wasn't the responsible choice. Then came the phone call. It was my dad. "Hey, son, you still sitting around?" His voice was light, but I could hear the edge of curiosity in it. He knew me too well. "Yeah," I replied, a little sheepish. "Just thinking, I guess." "Good. Thinking's important. What about going for a walk? There's a spot down by the lake that I've been meaning to show you. You've got a few days off, right? Come on, let's go. Get some fresh air." I hesitated for a second. A walk? It didn't sound like the kind of thing I'd normally choose. But maybe that was exactly why I needed it. Maybe I needed to get out of my own head and do something without purpose for once. "I'll be there in 10, I said, grabbing my jacket and heading out the door. The walk to the lake was longer than I remembered. The trees lining the path had grown thick and wild over the years, the air crisp with the scent of pine and earth. The kind of smell you forget about until you're forced to stop and breathe it in. My dad walked beside me, his hands in his pockets, his pace slow but steady. We didn't talk much, but that was fine. The walk itself was enough. When we reached the water's edge, my dad stopped, looking out over the lake. The early morning sun made the surface of the water shimmer, casting ripples of light in every direction. "You know, I used to come out here when things were heavy," my dad said, his voice soft but steady. "When I felt like the weight of everything was on my shoulders. Just needed to clear my head." I didn't say anything, just nodded, feeling the quiet settle between us. There was something about being out here, in nature, that made everything else seem smaller. The pressures of work, the expectations, the endless cycle of tasks, it all felt insignificant against the backdrop of something so vast and unchanging. "I get it now," I said after a long pause. "What you were talking about the other night. About the balance." He looked at me, his expression softening. "Yeah, son. It's easy to get lost in the rush, to think that every little thing is critical. But if you don't take care of yourself, you won't be able to do the things that matter. You'll burn out, and then everything you're trying to fix will fall apart anyway." I exhaled slowly, the weight of his words sinking in deeper. It was simple, but it was the truth I had been avoiding. The balance wasn't about finding a perfect formula, it was about knowing when to step back and give yourself space to breathe. Space to recharge, to see things clearly again. The rest of the walk was peaceful. We didn't talk much, just enjoyed the quiet, letting the serenity of the lake seep into us. When we finally made our way back to the car, I felt something shift inside me, like a knot had been untangled. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't thinking about the next deadline or worrying about what I had left undone. When we got back to the house, my dad gave me a quick clap on the back before heading inside. "You're figuring it out, kid," he said with a grin. "Just don't forget to take it easy now and then." That night, I sat on the porch, staring up at the stars. The sky was so clear, so full of light, and I felt like I could see everything at once. It was a humbling thing, realizing how small I was in the grand scheme of things. My work, my deadlines, they were just dots in the vastness of the world. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't chasing anything. I wasn't running after the next task or the next demand. I was just here. And that was enough. The next day, I went back to the office, but something had changed. When Dan called me in for the next project, I didn't feel the old rush of panic or the need to jump in right away. I took a breath, prioritized, and took the time I needed to make sure I was clear-headed. I set boundaries, not just for my work, but for myself. I still had a job to do. But now, I was doing it on my terms. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was sacrificing myself for it. I felt balanced. And maybe, just maybe, that was the key all along. The days that followed felt like a slow shift back into a rhythm I could actually handle. I started looking at things differently: work, my dad's advice, and most importantly, myself. It wasn't about shutting everything out or walking away from responsibilities. It was about giving myself permission to breathe, to reset when I needed it. I hadn't realized just how much I had been letting myself get consumed by my job. The constant deadlines, the emails, the never-ending tasks, it had all become a blur of stress, and somewhere along the way, I'd lost sight of what was important. But now, even with work still demanding my attention, I felt more in control. I was handling things on my own time, without that sense of urgency clouding every decision I made. One afternoon, about a week into this new way of thinking, I was sitting at my desk when I got a call from my dad. I picked it up immediately, knowing it was rare for him to call during the workday unless it was important. "Hey, kid. How's everything going?" "Good," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Actually, better than good. Been working on finding some balance." "Thanks to you." I could hear the smile in his voice. "Good. You've been pushing yourself too hard for too long. You deserve a break. But listen, there's something I need to talk to you about. It's not urgent, but, well, I think it's time." "Time for what?" I asked, intrigued. My dad didn't usually drop hints. "I'm thinking of retiring," he said. The words took a second to sink in. My dad, retiring? I had always imagined him working forever, even if he did talk about slowing down now and then. "Retiring?" I repeated. "What do you mean, like, now?" "Yeah. I've been thinking about it for a while. I've been working non-stop my whole life. It's time to step back and enjoy some of this time. Maybe travel, maybe just relax. Spend more time with the people who matter." I sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling in. For the first time, I realized that he had been living by his own advice. He had been taking it easy, slowing down, looking for that balance, all while still holding on to the lessons he had passed down to me. "That sounds like a good plan, Dad," I said finally. "What's your next move?" "I'm thinking of getting a little cabin out near the mountains. Somewhere quiet. Just me and the open space. You should come visit when I get settled." I smiled at the thought of my dad finally doing something for himself. "I'd like that. Maybe I'll take some time off, too." "You should. Take a break when you need it. Don't keep pushing until you hit the wall." It was strange hearing him speak this way. Not just as a father, but as someone who had made his own peace with the pace of life. And that realization hit me hard. I had been so focused on doing everything for everyone else, on trying to keep up with the expectations, that I had forgotten to ask myself what I wanted. The conversation with my dad lingered in my mind for the rest of the day. As I went through the motions of work, emails, phone calls, meetings, I felt a sense of detachment I hadn't experienced before. It wasn't that I didn't care. I still cared about my job. But I was no longer allowing it to consume me. I was carving out space for myself, for the things that mattered more. The next time Dan sent me a late-night message asking me to stay and finish something urgent, I didn't hesitate to answer. I'll get to it tomorrow. I'm done for the night. It wasn't that I was avoiding my responsibilities, it was that I was learning to prioritize them in a way that allowed me to live my life, too. And when the weekend rolled around, I took a trip out to visit my dad. The drive to his new cabin was longer than I had expected, but the further I went, the more I felt the tension release from my shoulders. When I finally arrived, the sight of his little cabin nestled in the quiet wilderness brought a sense of calm I hadn't realized I'd been craving. My dad was sitting outside on the porch when I arrived, a beer in hand, looking out at the mountain views. The air smelled fresh and cool, and for the first time in a long while, I took a deep breath and felt at peace. "Glad you made it, son," he said, standing up and giving me a hug. "Told you, didn't I? Time for a break." I smiled, feeling the weight of everything I'd been carrying finally start to slip away. We spent the weekend together, talking, fishing, walking through the woods. No pressure, no deadlines, just time spent living in the moment. It wasn't a perfect solution. There would still be times when work would demand my attention, when I'd feel that familiar pressure creeping back in. But now, I knew what to do when it happened. I knew that I didn't have to sacrifice myself to meet every expectation. I didn't have to choose between duty and leisure, I could have both, in the right balance. And that realization was everything. It was the thing that would carry me through the chaos, the thing that would remind me, every single day, that my life wasn't just about working or being busy. It was about finding peace in the quiet moments, taking care of myself when I needed it, and remembering that everything else would still be there tomorrow. Weeks passed, and the new balance I had started to create slowly became a part of my routine. Work was still there, still demanding, but it no longer had the same grip on me. I was able to dive into tasks without feeling consumed by them, and I knew when to step back, recharge, and focus on the things that mattered outside of the office. But there were still moments when the pressure crept in. Moments when emails piled up, when deadlines loomed just a little too close for comfort, and when the old anxiety tried to claw its way back into my life. It wasn't perfect. Life never is. One evening, I was sitting in my apartment, catching up on some work, when I got a call from Dan. He sounded a little more frantic than usual. "Hey, we've got a real problem here. Something's not adding up with the numbers on the last project, and I need you to look into it ASAP. It's a mess, and if we don't fix it, we're going to have some serious problems." The panic in his voice was enough to make me feel the familiar old tug of urgency. But this time, I didn't jump into action immediately. Instead, I took a deep breath, reminded myself that I had to maintain the balance I'd been working so hard to find, and then responded calmly. "Dan, I'll take a look in the morning. It's late, and I'm not in the right headspace to deal with it tonight." There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear him processing my response. "You sure? This really needs to be done, like, last-minute urgent?" "I'm sure. I'll get to it first thing tomorrow. Right now, I need some rest. It'll get done. Just, not tonight." He didn't push back. "All right. I trust you. Let's talk in the morning." As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. In the past, I would have immediately dropped everything to deal with whatever crisis was at hand. But now, I was standing firm. I had learned the value of rest, and I knew that pushing myself past my limits would only make me less effective in the long run. I spent the rest of the evening winding down, reading a book, watching an old movie, and taking some time just for me. I thought about my dad, out in the mountains, living the life he had been talking about for years. He had found his peace, his balance. And I realized that I was well on my way to doing the same. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling rested and ready. I took my time getting to the office, knowing I had the mental clarity I needed to tackle whatever was waiting for me. As I dug into the problem with the numbers, I was able to think clearly, work efficiently, and come up with a solution that solved the issue without stress or last-minute scrambling. By the end of the day, the project was back on track, and I felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. Not just because I had solved the problem, but because I had done it in a way that honored my boundaries. I wasn't sacrificing myself for the job anymore. I was finding the balance between duty and self-care. The more I worked at it, the more I realized that this balance wasn't something you achieved once and for all. It was a continuous practice, a daily choice to prioritize what truly mattered and let the rest fall into place. And each day, I felt more confident in my ability to make those choices, even when the pressure was on. It wasn't just about work anymore. It was about finding the space to live, to enjoy the quiet moments, to appreciate the people around me, and to remember that life wasn't just about meeting deadlines. It was about breathing, about being present, and about remembering that I didn't have to do everything all at once. That night, I called my dad. We talked about nothing in particular, just the kind of conversation you have when you're comfortable, when you've found your rhythm and you're at peace with where you are. I was thinking about the cabin, I told him. Maybe I'll come out again next month. Take a long weekend and really disconnect. That sounds like a good plan, he said, his voice calm and steady. It's not about escaping, it's about finding peace. We all need that, son. Sometimes the world moves too fast. It's good to step off the treadmill every once in a while. We hung up, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to rush into the next task. I didn't feel like I was behind or running out of time. I just felt content. Like I had finally started to figure things out, one day at a time. And that, I realized, was the real key to the balance I had been searching for. Not perfection, but presence. Not constant motion, but intentional pauses. It was enough. The weeks that followed were a gentle mix of work and rest, a rhythm I had come to appreciate more than I could have imagined just a few months ago. The chaos of my job was still there, but I had learned to navigate it with a steadiness I hadn't known I had in me. There were still tough days, deadlines that loomed large, problems that needed fixing, but I no longer felt like I was drowning in them. Instead of rushing to put out fires, I approached each task with patience and clarity, knowing I had the time and space to do things right. And as for the days off, I made sure they counted. I spent weekends with my dad in the mountains, hiking and talking about everything and nothing at all. We'd sit on the porch of his cabin, watching the sunset over the peaks, a silence between us that spoke volumes. Sometimes, I felt like I was learning from him all over again, not through words, but through his example. He was living a life of peace, one he had carved out for himself after years of hard work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And it was enough. I kept up with the office, of course. But now, when work called, I didn't feel the same sense of panic. I didn't feel like I was on the edge of a breakdown every time something went wrong. And when my boss, Dan, asked me to stay late or put in extra hours, I'd evaluate if it was worth it. Most of the time, I'd decline, not out of defiance, but because I knew that my well-being came first. And surprisingly, Dan respected that. He was used to me burning the candle at both ends, but now that I was setting boundaries, he started to take them seriously. It wasn't easy at first, pushing back against the old habits, but I could see the shift in myself. The stress that had once consumed me was now something I could acknowledge and manage instead of letting it dictate my every move. I realized that true success wasn't about how much I could take on, it was about how well I could take care of myself while still doing my best work. One afternoon, I found myself sitting on my porch after another long day. The sky was a rich blue, the air cool and crisp. I thought about the old version of myself, the one who never stopped working, the one who would have answered that 10 p.m. text from Dan without a second thought, no matter how tired I was. That version of me was still a part of me, but it didn't control me anymore. I grabbed my phone and sent a quick message to my dad, I'm coming out this weekend. Let's go hiking, his reply was immediate, looking forward to it. Need to clear my head too, it was then that I realized how much had changed, not just in me, but in my whole perspective on life. I had stopped living for the next task and started living for the moments in between. The quiet moments. The simple moments. The moments that felt like they lasted forever because they were filled with meaning. When I arrived at the cabin later that week, my dad was waiting for me, as always. We didn't talk much on the hike, just walked in silence, letting the beauty of the mountains speak for us. I felt a deep sense of peace, not because everything was perfect, but because I had learned to embrace imperfection. I had learned that it was okay to step back, to take a break, and to trust that everything would still be there when I was ready to dive back in. And in that moment, I understood something I had missed for so long. The most important thing wasn't work, or deadlines, or meeting expectations. The most important thing was to be present, to find balance, and to take care of myself so I could enjoy the life I had worked so hard to build. As we reached the summit of the hike, my dad turned to me, a smile on his face. "You're getting it, son," he said, his voice quiet but filled with pride. "It's not about the hustle. It's about knowing when to slow down." I looked out over the valley, feeling the weight of his words sink in. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift I could give myself. We stood there for a while, the two of us, taking it all in. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like everything was exactly as it should be.